Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Many familiar faces, bright and early in day, 4 of the fair, where, of course, only the intrepid and diligent ones survive. So happy to be here with Gabriel. You know, we only have about an hour, and then we have a lot to talk about, so we're going to just launch right into it. By way of introduction, I just wanted to mention briefly, we were just talking about this before we came on stage, this remarkable project called OXXO that took place almost exactly a year ago. Yes, right. Yeah, at Kurimanzutto Gallery in Mexico City. I'm going to just flip through some images. Here is the ubiquitous OXXO convenience store that you see everywhere in Mexico. Yes. There are thousands of them in the country. But this temporary one was inside the gallery. The other part of the gallery was this display of 300 selected item packagings with the stickers of the very familiar circular, semicircular, partial circular motifs that Gabriel has been using in many of his works. We were very lucky to be able to acquire quite a large group from this really remarkable project, but it is rather complicated to understand. There are rules, and it's a kind of a game. So we're going to come back to this. But before we do that, towards the end of this talk, we thought it would be nice to talk about some of the earlier works. So we're kind of going back almost, 25 years?
This, yeah, 91 is one.
Right. So the work called Crazy Tourist. So we have a few works from the early 1990s that we could perhaps talk about, because I think it's sort of, in my mind, sets the stage for the OXXO 25 years later. So could I ask you about this work that's actually quite iconic and very well known?
Well, yeah, it's good to see it again. Long time ago. I was traveling in Brazil, and I spent a year in Brazil, so traveling, and this is in Cachoeira. And when we arrived, was at the end of the day, and this market was just closing down, a kind of empty-ish, but then there were all these fruits, leftovers of fruits and packaging around, and I started to grab the oranges. They were all broken or discarded, and I started to place one on each table of the whole market that was now empty. And so I was running around, putting the oranges, taking some photographs. And then there were three guys drunk after the market day. They were drinking. And then they started to say, yeah, turista maluco, which is crazy tourist in Brazil. Está maluco. So the name is, in fact, is turista maluco, which is crazy tourist. So then, yes, and at that time I was working, well, still I am working, trying to interact in specific situations, at a specific moment, and with the found objects on the site. So the only thing I carried with me was a camera, and then just, you know, is a way of registering sculptorical events or making something with the found situations. And then this is one of the lucky ones, I think, because it's not easy to, it's not so frequent that you can do an intervention and improvise like this and end up being something well, complex enough to hold some meaning, you know, after the event. So in this case, the crazy tourist was lucky tourist. And
so the year after, Cats and Watermelons, is this a similar situation in the sense that camera was there to capture that moment of sculpture making rather than the other way around? Is it fair to say it like that?
Yes, well, I was doing shopping. This is in New York, in the supermarket I used to shop on the near La Guardia place. And then somehow I tried to apply the same system of dislocation of the goods, and thinking in how when we go to a supermarket, we have our trolley and then we start to grab things. Sometimes we change our mind and we don't want some things. We normally don't go back and put it exactly in the same place. We maybe squeeze it in or leave it there. Especially in New York, it's very big and it's all. So this idea of the supermarket as a perfect universe in which everything is in order, divided, subdivided, and in display, that when we start to interact with it, we start to generate some chaos inside this kind of archive and display of logos, goods, and food, etc. So it's one of the first pieces I did in the supermarket, which is not as poetic as a market in the streets or a market in Mexico. The classics markets are always kind of very picturesque and very charming. But then in a supermarket, I guess that's why this photograph got some attention, because it's absurd, but also is familiar. And the title is very simple, it's Cats and Watermelons. So, yeah, this is New York.
Right. So, I mean, something that we take for granted, that, I mean, we all go to supermarkets every day, but this incredible orderliness of where all these thousands of products, knowing their places, obviously it's all about capital and logistics, which I think is a kind of a good segue to the next image that I wanted to show, which is maybe more fair to say that a project rather than a work. What do you think? It's an economía de mercado?
Market economy. Well, yeah, it's a project that we did to open the Kurimanzutto gallery in Mexico City. And the idea was to start to work together with younger artists, but opening the gallery more like a agency for special projects in the field, public projects. So the gallery did not have a space at the beginning, was just promoting interventions in the public domain for different artists. So this one is the opening project, and we installed a group show in the market in Mexico City, a fruit market, and every artist has to work and make pieces in that, for that project. So they were, the prices were also as market. They were not like art market prices. They were very, very reasonable. And every artist participated with that. Yes, I did. Somehow I just, so it was part of the rules to make this project, and I proposed as a kind of intervention in a real market and a group show, playing with the rules of the market.
Right.
The regular fruit market.
Right. And then this only lasted for a day, isn't that correct?
Only lasted for a day, yeah. But it was sold out.
Sold out. Great. Yeah.
We became rich that day.
Great. So when we had a little pre-conversation before this conversation, we were thinking, okay, so what are some key words to talk about this? And kind of half-jokingly, we said, let's call it art market games. So we already started talking about art making. Market certainly has appeared in multiple guises in the last 5 minutes. But there's a lot to talk about in terms of games and rules, which has been an important part of your practice. So for instance here, horses running endlessly, 1995. Could you talk a little bit about this? Clearly a chess, but with only single kind of piece.
Yes. Well, when I was working outdoors, and the fact that I don't have a studio, and I work in the streets, in the place I live, in the markets, then you start to conceive, to think in the field, in the public areas of work as a board game somehow. So the city became a kind of board game, or a map, or a grid in which you start to behave and dislocate things and found things and set some rules of your own possible games and trajectories in the field. So then at this time I was doing billiard table, ping pong table, and then I want to try the chess. And the knight in chess, the horse, has this movement of 2 on 1, 1 on 2, which is a tridimensional proposition, how it jumps. Right. And I thought it was nicer to make a field for 4 teams of horses running endlessly, like if they were wild horses. So instead of a chess as a kind of war game, between kings and queens, right, and all these kind of medieval fantasy, to make it just more like an open field. And obviously, you can play, but nobody wins. But they're all running endlessly.
Have you actually played it?
Yeah, of course you play. Well, you can invent a game, for example, if you jump on top of another horse, right, you take it. But yeah, the funny thing is that you don't jump on top of a horse because you, in fact, are jumping between the lines of the square.
Right.
So, yeah, you can invent the game, but I leave it open, of course. It's a proposition. Visually, you can imagine how it moves. Yep. It has to do with that, too. I think it's the same with the oranges in the tables or the cats and watermelons. You can imagine the movement of the pieces landing on the tables or in the watermelons, or here you can just look at and imagine a possible game and movement. Right. So I think it's about that.
Is it, just to clarify, because I didn't think about this previously, but there are 3 colors, so are there 3 sides?
In fact, there are 4. Yeah, 4. It's 4 because it's a dark and a black and white, and then 2 tones of wood. But that's why there are 4. So it's 64 horses because it's divided in 8. So like the 2 lines, but they are all horses, and there are 4 colors.
Right. Yeah. So those doubles and quadruples and multiples is also an important point that we're going to come back to when we come back to the whole OXXO point. And and then also hearing how you describe it, it's not simply about a new kind of a game, but it's also a statement about kind of painting and sculpture in my mind, because you were talking about obviously the grid, x-axis and the y-axis, representation of 2 dimensions, but you're talking about the horses also jumping, which suggests a 3-dimensionality. So it's also about sculpture as well here.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But let's say more that it's about visuality and tridimensionality. Okay. That how we perceive objects on the world through color, that divides the fields, and you can recognize things, and we have a color code to understand things somehow. And then obviously the geometry that implies tridimensionality and how we perceive time and space. So regardless if I use painting or sculpture, which are 2 very conventional terms, or a real object or a board game or nothing, is probably better to talk or to think in the idea of the visuality of an idea and the tridimensional perceptivity of that idea. And instead of sculpture and painting, let's go more to, because at the end is what happened also in the OXXO project is you cannot say it's a sculpture, you cannot say it's painting, but it's both. It's logo, visuality, geometry, and I think is what happened in these games at the end.
Right. And then also the limits of the systems of representation and how also those limits open up other possibilities, perhaps. Okay. A couple more games. So here's Oval con Péndulo from 1996. So this is based on carangbol, no?
That's right.
The particular kind of billiard game.
Yes. Yeah, they call it also French billiards because it has no pockets and it's just 3 balls. And obviously, normally it's a rectangular table. And it's what I played when I was a kid. We didn't play pool so much. In Mexico, we were more into the tradition of Spanish and French carambol, which is just 3 balls, and you have to hit the 2 others to make a carambol, But in this case, I did a project for the Chapelle de la Charité in Marseille, and it is a dome in a cathedral, small place, but the dome is quite high. It's not so small. It's quite decent size cathedral, it was used for contemporary art and exhibitions. Was not functioning as a religious place anyway. But then I designed this, and at that time I was fascinated by Foucault pendulum, which is in Arrêt-Métier in Paris. They have one pendulum of Foucault, which, as you know, is perpetual motion, and is the way how we somehow prove that the Earth was moving, was in perpetual motion, because the pendulum was always moving, which always fascinated me, that because somehow sculpture and artists, we are always trying to generate this possibility of perpetual motion or the mobility of things, right? Kinetical art, op art, and sculpture like, Calder Mobiles, they all try to talk about movement. And so this billiard table was then conceived in an oval shape, and the red ball is hanging from the top of the dome, which is around 14 meters high, and then is 1 millimeter before touching the felt, and it's right at the center. And when you start to play and you hit the ball, then it starts to move like a pendulum, goes out of the table and comes back and keeps moving. So then when you try to hit next one and next one, there is the red one always in movement. So it becomes a bit difficult, but it's possible. And you can play carambol.
So instead of planets, it's like a comet.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like a comet coming into the green field and then leaving again.
Yeah.
You have to watch out for the other opponent, because sometimes they get hit in the... But it works. And then it's at the Tate now. Sometimes they display it there. And when the ceiling is a bit lower, the ball makes a deeper curve. When it's very high, it really goes very, very close to the table until almost touching the frame. So it's quite magic, because it looks like it's in the table, and then suddenly just keep going.
Right.
It's very funny.
Right. So like with a bigger diameter, it becomes a much bigger circle.
That's right.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, circle obviously is something very important for you, and different variations. And here's another game, ping pong table from 1998.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask earlier, when you play that version of carambol, is it a solitary game, or how many?
It's between two. Carambol, yeah.
Right.
You play. You have one ball has a black dot, it's very small. The other white ball is clear,
right.
And the red ball you don't touch. I mean, you don't hit.
Right.
So it's the 2 players play with the 3.
Okay, good.
For 2 players, yeah.
That tells you how much I know about games, but I do know about how to play ping pong, but usually with another person. But here you have to play with 3 other people.
Well, yeah, I mean, ping pong is for 2 or 4, right? But there's, let's say, it's 2 fields divided by the net. But it's interesting that you mentioning that, because, for example, chess is a game for 2 people, 2 teams in a grid. In the moment that I, in a way, multiply by 2, so there are 4 teams of horses, means that there can be 4 players around the square. The billiard is round and is moving and floating, so it can be 1, 2, but many, and just around. So it's more like a circular game for more than 2. And also, in a way, becomes a proposition that is not bidimensional in the 2 players, but 4-dimensional or multidimensional, because they are more. You are multiplying the number of players too. So here, for example, when the net is the division of the 2 fields when you open up that net, you make a tridimensional space. And that tridimensional space, which is in this case a pond, it can be anything. It can be sand, it can be nothing. But then I decided to make and play with the idea of the pond and the lotus flower. I need to make this round because if you are playing, you need to go around the table. So if you have it in squares, you will hit the corners. So it needs to have this shape in order to be played. So it's a game that you play 1 against 3, basically. And then the ball, instead of getting stopped by the net, sometimes just stops in the pond. And then everything is suspense, and then we put some water lilies, and the balls, white balls look very nice, and then it's more like a haiku. Yeah. Instead of a great shot, instead of a passing shot, is a haiku shot. And but you can play, and it works. It's not that boring. This is nice. It's more floaty.
So is that why? Because you were just saying in passing that it could be sand or it could be nothing. So instead of being a desert or it could, instead of being a valley, it is a pond. Like, is that?
Well, you know, I was thinking in the. Well, this is more complicated, but sometimes I get very deep in my thoughts, and I was thinking in the beginning or in the origin of things. And you know, the pond is one possible beginning or center of life, right? So this becoming a water lily shape or a kind of lotus flower shape, the table itself, then you have the pond with the water lilies inside. And then it's a pond that when you start to play as a new game and you start to activate the water with the hitting on the balls, the floating and all that, I thought that was interesting. If the billiard table is connected to Foucault pendulum and perpetual motion and or awareness of the earth rotating, and then the horses running endlessly is a connection. There is a connection with the idea of landscape, wilderness, but also the grid as a kind of activated space of thinking and perception. Then why not the ping pong and this idea of games and sports and the poetic and landscape and or memory, make it a kind of fountain or a kind of pond. And also the name ping pong table was nice.
Yeah, it is very nice. Okay, got it. Okay, so I think I want to talk, there's another view with the floating ping pong balls. I mentioned already several times the importance of circles or variations of circles, which have been appearing for a long time, you know, in your own sketchbooks and notebooks, even before they appeared more formally into your artwork. So this is light signs, and they're in Gwangju, South Korea, in 1995 for the first edition of the Gwangju Biennale. So could you talk about how you decided to make this work, especially in the light sign format?
Yes, absolutely. So these diagrams with the circles and the colors, I used it a lot in my notebooks. It was always like a private practice in my notebooks doing this. I did not show that many of these drawings when I was showing the ping pong table or the horses running endlessly or nothing. I was just showing photography and sculpture. And then I arrived to the Gwangju, and that is the way I like to work in biennials, is always arriving empty-handed. So I did never send a work before, occasionally, but always arrive with the idea that I could make something right on the spot for the biennial and take the same practice that I was doing in the markets and the streets to go to the biennial. So on the first Gwangju biennial, I arrived a week before, and then looking at signs in the city, I was confronted with this non-understanding what they mean, and then they became very abstract to me, and they were, most of them, this kind of low-tech. For sure now is very different, but at that time, 95, still were many things in construction in Korea. There was a time that still was not completely finished, all the improvements that they were.
It took a while.
It took a little while, right? But these were all around, these light signs, and they are kind of low-tech, handmade signs. So I found a workshop, they were doing this, and they did my drawings, and this guy, he coated with a it was very nice. It's very craftily made. It's not like printed. It's they're like stickers on a light box. And then I did I think 5 or 8, and I show one in my booth, in my stand, in the biennial, and everybody was really perplexed. They couldn't understand what I was. It's the first time I showed this, yes. And everybody was like, "What is this?" Yeah. I thought that you were a good artist, and then suddenly you are doing this silly abstraction. So,
but these 2 light boxes are in the street.
Yeah, okay. Right in front of the workshop. Yes. So I took this photo, and they're right in the street. Okay. But normally it's a light box, so you have a little light, you know, so they against the wall, and then they are.
Yeah, and then you were saying that you had been making circular patterns for a long time in your sketchbooks privately. But speaking of notebooks, so here are
that's right.
What you call 12 Korean notebook pages of the same year.
Exactly. Well, it's the drawings I was doing to show to the people in the light sign workshop what I wanted to make. So I bought a small notebook in Korea, and I started to make these sketches.
Right.
And then from these sketches I made the designs. Okay. So
yeah, they're like a ledger books or something, isn't it? I think. Okay, I can't quite read from here.
Well, you know, they are exactly, I don't know what they are exactly, but they have lines and some kind of, I don't know, accounting book, I think.
Yes, I think so.
Then, but then, you know, since I was a kid, I love I have many drawings since I was a kid that I was depicting planets or soccer games or movement. I love to paint all that and make drawings since I was a kid. Yeah. I love Saturn, the planet, and I love to play the solar system. So it's funny, since always I have been fascinated with this idea of the bolide, the vehicle, the sphere, the jumping or bouncing and trajectory of the spheric form. Yeah. And that's why I end up also putting the axis, because at the end those are trajectories, possible trajectories for the circle. So it's not like a circle on its own, independent from the world, but it's a circle that is with a possible direction connecting with another and another and another. Yeah. And then, of course, that can grow in many ways.
Then, speaking of circles and which are connected to the movements, then this comes immediately after the Atomist series. We have a few images here that comes the year after. So they're not static circles, they are about movement, and in fact, combined with images of movement in games and sports.
Yeah, well, billiards, sports, very good, nice selection of pictures. It's all connected. So yes, I was in London. I was preparing a project, and I started to somehow to test these diagrams against photographs, and I thought that sport movement photographs was interesting because. For many reasons, but one reason is that many times sport photographs, they don't hold in time. They get boring after time, you know. So it's hard that you have which is kind of unfair, but I understand it's just a photo of a moment that maybe was a big important moment, but the photo itself is not so interesting. And I was thinking, why is that a photograph of movement and quite colorful event, it doesn't get, over time gets really boring. So I thought that to applying this diagram, my illusion was that testing the diagram against the photography, the movement of the photograph, will hold it, cancel it, but then recycle it. So you can re-dynamize. Is that a word?
Redeem?
Dynamization, to dynamize, to maybe I invent one. Recycle, no, well, yeah, to get another cycle of movement using this flatness on top of this flatness, canceling, revealing, and then you start to re-look at the photo and then reimagine the movement that is in theory in the image. So that's how I start to apply them to this. So it's very sculptorical, and I mean it's probably hard to claim or to prove what I'm saying, but the way is distributed the color that jumps like the knight in chess, and the way that I'm playing with symmetry, axis, gravity point, centrifugal point, and the found image in the back generates the possibility of the sculptorical or tridimensional in the movement of the photograph. Oof.
All right. Then, okay. Then, yes, while you're doing that, but then the images disappear. It becomes a flat surface on which circles are proliferating. Then they work differently, no? Because in Atomus, then you were talking about photography of photos of movement that have become static and how the circles reanimate, perhaps is the word, or
reanimate. That sounds good.
Okay, but when there's no photographic image, but rather gold surface like this, I have 3 works, I believe here, yeah, or white surface like this.
Well, yeah. So, yeah, what happened here is that when I start to do these diagrams, at some point, I really wanted to test them alone, independent, like somehow that the illusion of abstraction will claim some kind of independence from mimetical functions, right? So abstraction was, in theory, a way of liberating ourselves from representation and looking into other more metaphysical things, etc. But then, if this diagram was complex enough and representative enough of the things I was looking in my other works, in sculpture, ready-mades, etc., I would like to try it independent of any other ready-made image, just flat on a painting. So then I kept using the same colors, so it's red and blue, and then white and gold, because gold is also a non-color or a total color, let's say, like white. So the balance for me, this is a correct balance as a diagram in terms of the weight of a color, and then the discs are growing half of the half, or up double of the double of the double, right, into a square surface that is the limit of the board game. So then these paintings became a game on its own, on their own, became a project that I call the samurai tree, because the idea of the samurai as taking a decision to go into do something and then don't changing your mind has to do with this. It's like the idea of one decision and then you just go for it. And the tree is that is growing like a tree from the center always,
right,
and then it starts to grow, but obviously has a central axe, like a gravity point. Then the center, in the main center of the square, is the centrifugal point, and you can see a tree perhaps, or the structure of a tree from the top, if you were on the air, but also as a landscape. So it was very important to me that was not a window. So it's not like Mondrian grid that somehow is always you are looking at a window. And comes from trees too, of course, and from the horizon, but then it's a window. Here is also like if you are looking at a chessboard or a Go game or something from the top, and you can imagine you can go around, so it's spherical somehow.
So does that mean that the border of the painting actually doesn't stop this movement and the proliferation that in your mind?
No, in this case, yes, it stops totally. So I never in this case, I never cut the circles in half. So it's basically the end of the sequence ends in the limits of the field, which is in the borders, and that's it.
Okay.
But of course, you can think that it will grow if you are making bigger or bigger. But in this case, it's very precise. For this series, and then I did the variations because I start to rotate the colors, and then they appear. For example, if you go to next, it's the same drawing, or the one before.
The one before.
So it's the same drawing, exactly the same drawing, but all the white disappears because the background is white.
Yep.
If you go to the gold one, it's the same drawing,
yep,
but all the gold disappear in the background.
Great. Okay.
So the background, when it's 4 colors or 1 color, make that some of the everything that is gold disappear in the background.
Right. Okay.
Quadrants. Yeah, makes one of the quadrants disappear.
I see. That you see more here. Okay.
Right.
All right. So we talked about being in Gwangju 23 years ago. Samurai tree invariants. You have been spending more and more time in Asia, actually even living, have been living here for a few years. This was back in 2015, a solo project in Tokyo. Could you talk about these sort of found, I guess, architectural materials, old buildings there, plus Go game, yes?
Yes, it's also another... yeah, it is an installation based on wooden pieces from temples and housing that were discarded. I found them in the harbor in a storage place that they were all giving away. This not for free, but it was very inexpensive. It's for construction and all that, but they are all recycling materials. And I was interested in the joinery, in the work of the carpenters that they do these amazing geometric shapes to join the wood in the construction of temples and houses. So I was. It's called visible labor because then it's more about the cuts and the joinery than the wood itself. Is how it's cut, and I was just trying to present them like that. I did some cuts myself. I play, and then I decided to signal or to highlight the cuts by painting them in white. Which is also common practice in wood. Sometimes you paint in white when you want to cover something, but it's also it's part of the aesthetics. And then white highlighting the cuts, and then as a kind of joke, I got this. Well, I also hide some Buddhas, wooden Buddhas that I was getting in. There are small wood Buddhas, very old, and then I decided to play with Ferraris, so I got some small Ferrari cars, red, because I thought that was obvious that they look like the flag of Japan, white with a red Ferrari in the center, makes sense, right? And then a hiding Buddha in between the joinery, and then I found this Go game in the same place, and I bought it and I put it there on display, and then I used the stones to disperse them around the beams. So it's a very much like a landscape, maybe a little bit of a Tokyo Dream landscape with all these Ferraris around, like horses running endlessly.
But with serenity as well, I guess, which
yes, right.
represents.
And the Buddhas are hiding in between the joinery.
There you go, right there.
Yeah.
Okay. And another body of work that you made since moving to Tokyo is this beautiful watercolor on this very particular kind of gold surface, paper surface that are often used in historically in Japanese paintings. So you can see here, obviously, the circular patterns, the samurai tree invariant, but it does more than that. And it has to do with the physical quality of the watercolor that is different from acrylic.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, the paintings are done in tempera on wood or canvas and gold leaf, very medieval way of painting related with the icons and, you know, Russian icons and all that is similar technique. And here is a very classic watercolor on this goldish, golden paper. So applying these diagrams, but trying to depict a little bit of nature, movement. Is more organic, is more like a landscape or a branch. Obviously, I'm thinking in calligraphy and tradition of painting in the East, or at least in Japan, while most of the most important paintings are done in paper and water-based pigments for paper and the screens and all that. So I was looking at Sotatsu painting, and I was trying to study that, and then doing my own application using watercolors on that paper.
Here's another example of it. Oh. And then, can I just ask about the... Yeah, there you go. I think before coming back to that. And then the way that you decided to display with this very simple but elegant structure was...
Thank you. Yeah, well, I was doing them, and again, I wanted to improvise the installation a little bit so they don't look immediately like frame and, you know, kind of boring. So I have them like this in my apartment because I was working with wood pieces, and I did all this in my apartment in Tokyo. So I did this improvised shelf like that, and I was looking at them in my house like this, right? So then I said, well, they look okay, I think. Let's do the same in the gallery.
Yeah.
And so then, you know, easy to transport, easy to take out, easy to play with them, and they look more unassuming and more processual, maybe more like again like a game.
Yeah.
And yes, you know, screens and scrolls, as you very well know, is a very different way of showing a work than a frame or a Western book or a vitrine, you know. So perhaps this is closer to a display that you will find in a tea room in a Japanese house, right? Or something like that. So it's more casual.
Painting is something to bring out for a particular event temporarily. Totally different approach to painting. Now, okay, so we've talked about circles, we've talked about games and rules, we talked about the market, and I think all of those come together in this project. Now we're back to where we started, which is, again, this really remarkable project called OXXO at Kurimanzutto Gallery back in 2017. You built an actually operating OXXO store inside the gallery. And then you see the samurai tree invariant trope, the motif on some of the packagings. Dos esquisses. And then you go through the shop, and then you come to this, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. The first, when you arrive to the gallery, you see this suddenly OXXO sign, like we saw in the first photograph, and then it's disconcerting because it's suddenly like, oh, the kurimanzutto is closed. Now they move an OXXO here again. Which they do often, not with galleries, but with everything. They just appear, bump it, and they destroy. I mean, it's of course it's polemical because OXXO is obviously like here everywhere. They change the game completely for the people selling, you know, whatever. So anyway, so you arrive there, then you enter into the shop, which is installed exactly like 100-meter square classic OXXO shop. Yep. With all the products they sell and everything. Yeah, go back. Yep. And then I decided to intervene some of them. And for that reason, I need to put some limits and start to set some rules. Yep. And I decided to intervene with the sticker 300 different products, packages. And then, and then I put these one of each in the shop inserted in between the corridors, normal. So that's what you have. And then there is a door that could be a kind of service door or exit door for the workers or something, and suddenly you arrive and you see this diagram which explains, it's a chronogram that explains all the edition numbers and how they're going to be on display, and somehow explains also the pricing, because we also, as we did in the Economía de Mercado original project at Kurimanzutto, we also in this one, I tried to develop a system of pricing that collapsed the prices of the art market and, let's say, my work, and then the regular prices of products in a convenience store. So for that, it's quite complicated to explain, but we did edition of 10, and the prices were doubling every time was sold. But in fact, we start from the top price, let's say 30,000, and then the next one half, and then when that was sold, half, until the 10th, which was around $50, same product, but the idea is that one collector will buy it in top price, and happily will see it crash down all the way to the bottom during the exhibition.
Right.
And at the end of the show, everybody will be very happy because the value of the work will be intact for sure. But during the show was quite messy, and it worked. So, like, you got a good deal, huh? In the museum.
Yeah, I mean, we do, but you know, when museum acquires something, the value goes back to zero.
That's
Doesn't
right.
it? You know, it stops circulating.
That's right. Anyway, this is the entrance of the show, and then you enter. You have the pictures of the how you call them in
So
English?
prototype, would you say? I mean, these are the 300 merchandises.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. These are the 300 on display. Funny enough, I decided to divide them by colors. So you have the green group, the blue group, and things like that, because it was nice to see it like that. And just one line in the center of the room, and you go around like a circle somehow, and it's one after the other, and you have all the 300. But these are exactly the same that you have in the shop, in the OXXO shop. But these are just like clean with nothing around. Right. I put the two lines, yellow lines, because it's the OXXO kind of color.
Yeah.
But this is more like a classic display, very simple display, I think, in the gallery space. So you can see now the packaging with the stickers with more, more calm. So you can maybe read some of them. These are products that are very, very familiar to Mexicans. It's like there are many things that I used to consume when I was a kid in school. And then there are also many things internationally known, then there are local things, then there are there is everything. It's liquor, chewing gum, there are condoms, there are everything that you find. So then it's a whole landscape, and the idea is a kind of scroll, if you want, with calligraphy, reading, with logos, with images that even someone that doesn't speak Spanish will have probably the same perception of a landscape of images that are in the everyday life of a Mexican, and you can read this as a show that you read, or you just perceive as a landscape or a skyline or something like that.
I see. Is this the particular way that you would like this work to be shown if it's reconstituted as a group?
I think this is not a bad way, but of course depends on the quantity of products. And also you can make 3 lines, because it's what you have in the OXXO. Also, you have 2-3 lines, like a shelf is possible. But I think if it's very simple like this, and you have just one line, you see one after the other, like a building, like a little bit of a little sculpture, and then you can go through each one.
Right. So in that sense, it goes back to one of your earlier works that you made in New York in 1993 with the debris, recreating a miniature skyline of New York City.
Island into an island, yes.
Yeah, island within an island. That's right.
Or the oranges. Right? In MoMA, when my show at MoMA in '93, I asked the neighbors in front to put an orange in the windows. and that orange became a little bit like a logo or a orange point in the landscape. So.
Yep. I think we should talk about this a little bit.
Well, we did a hologram of ID hologram. We stick that on the back of the product. So this is just to see that this not we don't accept fakes, and we did this very glamorous hologram with the on the OXXO. Obviously, it's a joke that came out at work. It suddenly makes sense, Orozco, OXXO, whatever. So this is a joke. And then I made this, we print this money, which is an old Mexican peso and the dollar. So as a OXXO bill.
So this is the...
We give it for free. Now just to maybe... Okay. So we give it for free in the entrance, so every visitor has one of these, and they can exchange for any product of the OXXO, for a Coke or a coffee or something, but not with the sticker. The sticker is for display, and you cannot consume it right away, and you pay in real money. But the shop, and you want to have a coffee or a snack or something, you can use these bills. You have one per person. Right. And then what happened is that they became very popular, and the people start to get the peso, get away with the money without consuming a Coke. Right. Very smart, of course, makes sense. So it was
selling it on eBay or something.
It was, yeah, and sell it on eBay, yes, exactly. Right. But it's, I hope you have one. Good.
I didn't have a chance to exchange it. No. So then, like, we are talking about so many different kinds of economies that are interwoven or kind of collapsing. So this temporary economy where people are encouraged to actually exchange and get something to consume, but that's temporary. And the fact that these are collected or even being exchanged on eBay or whatever means that it has entered a separate kind of an economy, which is, of course, different from art economy. And then the project, the sales had to happen as artworks also only during that time period, isn't it? Like, you didn't want this to continue to stay in the circulation of the art market.
Yeah, that's right. So, yes, that's right. I have to, first I have to also do, to reduce the amount of products to be produced by half, because I need to generate some kind of a scale and exponential decrease in the production to also maintain this proposal of marketing. Yeah. You have to, it's kind of generating scarcity. Yeah. You know? And then, so we didn't produce the 3,000, we just produced half of it, 1,500. But then the pricing was going up, I mean, on down. And then we, the idea is that the project lasted 30 days. There were 300 products, which were edition of 10, that means 3,000 products. And then all by number, all the numbers have to do with, obviously, time, price, quantity, and in the moment that the show finished, the sale with this set of rules, the game is over. Right. So it was a game during 1 month, 30 days, in this gallery as a board game that is about market, logo, products, and distribution.
Right, right. Well, I mean, that's kind of an interesting place to be, especially in the context of an art fair, of course. I think maybe it gives the audience some ideas as they are going into the fair, or maybe it confuses them. But maybe that's exactly what this project needed to do. I mean, is this sort of meditation on circulation in the market? Is that something always in your mind? Is this going to come back as occasional projects?
Yes, I think so. I mean, in general, the work, but is concerned, first of all, in the way it's produced. I think it's very important to analyze, and an artist has to develop a personal way of producing the work that will generate the language of the work. The proposition, the meaning of the work is already established somehow or projected since the way you produce the work. how you produce the work, how much money you invest on that, or if it's expensive, or if it's found, or if it's sustainable, or if it's ecological, if it's political, is already projecting the possible directions of distribution and consumption of the work in the different markets we have, right? So, but that you can say the same with the Turista Maluco, that is produced in the way it's produced, the use of the visuality, the use of the dynamic, and how it circulates in the world as images, also as objects, also as icons, and then how you are proposing, and since the way it's produced, how it should be priced, and then repriced, and then recycled, and then kept or get discarded. Oof, something like that.
Yeah, we could talk about this almost infinitely, trying to understand the rules and then how it actually played out and whatnot. But I think we've are already getting the signal that we're over time by 6 minutes. So thank you, Gabriel. This was a very, very fast walkthrough of a very small part of your career.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Doryun.